So I'll let Samir explain the jinns in pre-Islamic Arabia, because what's fascinating, it's the history and how the thought evolved. It's so clearly and manifestly humans just trying to make sense of reality around them. So all
Yeah,
over to Samir.
exactly. I just feel like when you look at pre-Islamic ideas about jinns, it just becomes so clear that the whole thing is just basically what Muhammad believed to be true based on pre-existing teachings of the time, or pre-existing, let's say, belief systems, right? And in pre-Islamic Arabia, there's a paper called "Rehabilitating the Spirituality of Pre-Islamic Arabia." It shows you how rich the religious milieu was of pre-Islamic Arabia. They had they had the Kahin, there was the Sha'ir. The Kahin was a medium, like a shaman type of individual, that helped people talk to the ancestors, or the spirits, communicating between the living and the dead, and making sure that the ancestors were happy. So this is sort of like a tribalistic religion. And even the poets, the sha'ir, were considered or have thought to have got inspiration from the jinns, right? And this reminds me of when Muhammad got his revelation, and his wife was saying, "Oh, you're not a kahin, you're not." And even the word that's used, soothsayer, is like a negative word, right? It's already been negatively influenced by the Abrahamic religions, and the bias of seeing all of this shamanistic rituals as being sort of evil. How paganism is seen as evil. Even though it's really like ancestor worship and all that. And obviously, as atheists, we're neutral to all of these things, but we're just looking at it from an anthropological perspective, right? We're saying, the pre-Islamic values were more, you can say, tolerant to others, right? They were more like pluralistic. And so, just to go back to pre-Islamic Arabia, right? Jane Adelman Smith and Yuan Yazbek have reported in situations of violent death in Egypt, the spirit is often felt to have become an ifrit, which is a type of jinn, and to hover around its former habitation for a number of days, and it goes out at night begging people for a drink. It's not uncommon in other cultures for there to remain an overlap between spirits of the dead and demons, with those considered evil in life becoming potential demons. So this is not an Islamic belief. Islamic belief does not say anything about humans becoming jinns or anything like that. We're just showing you that the idea of jinns was more vast and more broad before Islam. And then Muhammad, of course, limited it to his specific understanding. And then you're going to see the Islamic explanation, right? But before Islam, it was just like a general belief, and there was different categories, and we're going to go through that. So there's 3 types of jinns: Ghul, Ifrit, and Sila. And Al-Jahiz said every supernatural creature takes diverse forms, right? They seem to appear in different forms, often animalistic, and appear and disappear like the light of a torch. And generally any jinn, listen to this, leaves a physical corpse behind when killed. And we have this poem from pre-Islamic Arabia that says, "I spent the night leaning on her, waiting for her in the morning to see what I caught. Then I found 2 eyes in an ugly head, similar to the head of a cat with a forked tongue." So like, they used to believe that some of the dead, like they would see something, they would say this must be the corpse of a jinn. So just imagine, pre-Islamic Arabia, this is what they used to believe. They used to believe all of these things. And now we're going to go over to jinns in Islam. Should I keep going?
Yeah, well, what you can see on the screen here is you took a quote from the exorcist tradition in from Bilal Phillips. One thing I wanted to mention out that Dr. Bilal Phillips actually did his PhD in exorcism in Islam. So he is the genie don, the genie expert, okay, of the shayukh. But from his book, as Samir, you can read out the quote for me.
Yeah. Ibn Taymiyyah said, no one in any of the Muslim sects denies the existence of jinn or that Allah sent Muhammad to them. So, the funny thing is, I remember a story, I'm not going to mention, there was a Muslim guy I was debating with on Facebook. And I'm like, you don't believe in this, like this stuff? And he's like, no, I don't believe in it. I'm like, it's in the Quran. He's like, oh yeah, I believe in it. And he had to change he had to believe in it. It's like a theological compulsion. You have no choice.
Before we go forward, I just wanted to say one thing, that a lot of people will try to say that jinns or genies are metaphors and they're not actually beings, and Allah using them as some weird storytelling method. But the problem is that the genies are actually tied in with literal historic events that are tied in with Quranic revelations, and they're recorded extensively in Sira books. So no, they are definitely not just metaphorical beings. In fact, you will see extensively throughout the Quran and literature affirms them as being actual beings that worship Allah and that can affect us and the environment around them. So what we'll go first is what are jinns made up of? So we see in Surah Hijr, verse 27, and Surah Rahman, Allah says that we created, and the jinn we created before from scorching fire. And then he says, and he created the jinn from a smokeless flame of fire. So you see here that Allah created jinns from fire, but it's smokeless. That's one thing we see. And this ties in back to the incident of Iblis, where when Allah asked him to prostrate to Adam, Iblis used his creation from fire as an objection, saying that he's created from something more fierce like fire, whereas Adam is only made from clay, and hence the whole saga continued. I just wanted to point that. Let's move forward and see what's up next. This is very, very, very important. And I actually didn't realize this a while back. I was just reading the Sira again 2 years ago. We're just showing two versions of this. This is extensively recorded in Ibn Asaq, Tafsir Ibn Kasir's Sira as well, but we're just using Tabari's volume 6, page 117 to 119. I'm just gonna go to my site so I can read it clearly.
Yeah. So when Prophet Muhammad left Taif, and he went to return to Makkah, when he was at Nakhla in the middle of the night to pray, as God has said, a number of jinns passed by. Muhammad ibn Ishaq said he was told there was 7 jinn from Nasibin of Yemen. They listened to him, and when he had completed his prayer, they went back to the people to warn them, having believed and responded to what they have said.
Yeah. So what happened here is the psychological thing that's needed, very important to highlight. Muhammad goes to Taif. Muhammad is upset. Muhammad is not happy the way people of Taif reacted to his message. In fact, they stoned him, pushed him out of the city. Muhammad is sad, and he is like, he doesn't know what to do. He's desperate, and then suddenly, nobody believes Muhammad. But who believes Muhammad after being rejected by Taif people? The genies, of course. So you can see that how a mind could confabulate this genie explanation to fill in the void of this rejection that was created by the people of Taif and Makkah, constantly mocking Muhammad. And as you can see on the right side, it gives into more detail where he goes into the market of Ukaz, and then here's what I'm going to read. So at the same time, a barrier was put between the devils and the news of the heaven. Fire commenced to be thrown at them. The devils went to their people, who asked them, "What is wrong with you?" They said, "A barrier has been placed between us and the news of heaven, and fire has been thrown at us," the shooting stars. They said, "The thing which has put a barrier between you and the news of heaven must be something which has happened recently." The genies fly eastwards, and they come across the Prophet at a place called Nakhla. And near that market, he was offering Fajr prayer with his companion. So these genies then actually hear Muhammad recite the Quran, and they go to themselves, "By Allah, this is the thing which has put a barrier between us and the news of the heavens." Then they went to their people and said, "Oh people, we've heard this Quran," and Surah Jinn was revealed. As you can see, the whole story surrounding this, where the genies are flying, and then they're like, "Oh, we can't eavesdrop on the angels anymore. I wonder what happened." And then they find this man just kind of praying in this place alone in the morning, early hours of the morning, and he's reciting these chants, and the genies are like, "Oh my God, that explains it all. That must be it." Like, it's so observed and so self-serving.
I have a little bit more to say about that. I'm gonna wait for the slides because there's more to this than just
the story. Yeah.
So the funny thing I remember from the story is that I remember reading a hadith. I don't have the reference right now, where the companions were worried. They're looking for Muhammad. Like, where's Muhammad? Where's Muhammad? We can't see him. And then they found him coming back at night in the desert. And they're like, where were you? Like, we were looking all over for you. And he's like, come with me, come with me. He shows them a campsite where there's like fire pits or whatever. He's like, you see these fire pits? That's from the jinn.
Yeah.
The jinns.
I think we have that hadith forward later on, but yeah, like just randomly these jinns come to him.
So I thought this was very interesting, and when I was doing research for this, I think this is a very important thing to understand when you're studying jinns. And this hadith about the heaven being blocked, I want you to keep that in mind. Prophets saw, I should say Prophet Muhammad saw Kahins as competition. Because you will see just how haram he made it, talking to a Kahin. In pre-Islamic Arabia, these Kahins were considered people that you go to if you need, for example, like an oracle, for example, right? But he wanted to be the exclusive one dealing out with the truth, right? Because there's prophets and then angels, and then it goes to Allah. Whereas from Kahins talk to jinns, and they get access to otherworldly information, right? So Muhammad said, actually Muawiyah said, I said, Messenger of Allah, there were things we used to do in the pre-Islamic days. We used to visit Kahins, whereupon Muhammad said, don't visit Kahins. Okay? So basically he didn't like it. He didn't like them going to Kahins. Then they had a question. I asked Messenger of Allah, the Kahins used to tell us about the unseen, and we found them to be true. So now this is a test of his prophethood. People always say that, when Ibrahim died, his son, and the moon eclipsed, he said, oh no, the moon doesn't eclipse for me. It was just the death of a normal man. And people are like, wow, see, he's a true prophet. He's telling the truth. But let's look at this. Let's see if he got it right here. He said, they're asking him, how come jinns know the truth sometimes? Now, any logical person would say, well, obviously once in a while, any fortune teller is going to get things right. The question is, are they right more than average? Like a little bit of skepticism will show you that they're just making things up. But that's not what he said. He said, no, there's a worth pertaining to truth which a jinn snatches and throws in the ear of his friend and makes an addition of 100 lies to it. So these guys are convinced Kahins are telling the truth, and they're asking Muhammad to explain it because he's a competing truth teller now. He's giving them a different narrative. And he's like, oh yeah, but the jinns add 100 lies to it on top of the truth they tell you. So you don't know what's...
I thought, here's something that's very important. I know that that Allah cannot let out divine wisdom or divine inspiration to any human apart from through angels, right? There's verses in the Quran about that. But then from what it seems here, that the Kahins had partial access, a backed VPN tunnel into the... So they were like hacking some bit, and then the firewall would kick in and boot them off the server. It's
hackers. Jinns are actually modern day hackers, right? They're anonymous. They're trying to get the truth out, but now there's a new firewall installed and the VPN's not working anymore.
But what's interesting is, why is Allah's security so shady? Like, come on, you can just stop the jinns from hearing anything at all.
and this is where Muhammad now is changing the narrative. He's trying to tell people, well, they used to do that, no longer anymore. Now Allah's sealed it off, right? Do you want to explain this?
Okay, so here's what the details about this is. So one of my favorite things I like talking about is shooting stars chasing genies who eavesdrop on angels. So essentially what happens is, to give a summary, is these genies used to go up in heaven, sit around the 6th and 7th heaven, and they'd listen to what Allah was telling the angels, or what the angels were talking about amongst themselves. Then the genies would listen, and then they'd run away. And they'll give that one thing they heard to the Kahin, who would add 100 lies to it and make it something else. But what was fascinating, how did Allah scare the genies away from listening to his heavenly conversations? By having the angels throw stars as missiles or stones at them. So what we see here in Surah 67, verse 5, it's and we have decorated the nearest sky with lamps and have made them devices to stone the devils and prepare from them the punishment of hell. The word here is rujuma lishayatin, which is rajam, stoning the devil, right? So this is the heavenly angel stoning the Jamarat alternative.
And this is an interesting verse as well, because it's actually an intersection of dunya and like the unseen, ilm al-ghaib, right?
Yeah.
What it's saying is Allah is describing وَلَقَدْ زَيَّنَا السَّمَاءَ dunya. He's saying the sama dunya, the nearest heaven, meaning the star, is decorated with stars. So in one swoop, he's defined what the sama dunya is, because he said there's stars in it, right, with lamps. So these lamps, what are these lamps? So obviously it's describing something that they were looking at. It's not just talking about, you know, like all unseen thing. It's an intersection of this reality and the other reality. So this is an example of how they try to use, you know, they try to explain these things and give them otherworldly meanings, where obviously we know shooting stars are not chasing devils. There's no devils in space. They didn't even know what space was.
Yeah.
We'll get to space genies though.
Yeah, it's just it's meteorites. Just to give you an explanation, that it's so dumb, this explanation, and why it doesn't make sense, because Muhammad says it goes up to the sixth and the seventh heaven where the genies are sitting, and if you read Surah 72:8, it literally says, "And we sought to reach the sky, we found it with stern guards and flames, and that we used to sit at places." So these genies were literally up in space or heaven or whatever, hiding. It's literally like what, like a video game, like a tactical action espionage video game. I gotta listen to what the angel's saying, avoid detection. Oh shit, the alarm's off. Oh, there comes the star. I gotta book it. But even actually, when you actually see from the space station, or that they occur in the atmosphere, entry time in the Earth. They're not even in space, honestly. They're like space rocks that burn up so they enter the atmosphere, and the friction creates a streaking tail. And that's what they call as shooting stars. But anyways, what do we have here again? So I heard Allah's messenger saying the angels descend, the clouds, and mention this or that matter decreed in heaven. The devils listen stealthily to such a matter, come down to inspire the soothsayer with it. And the latter would add 100 lies to it. I think I'll take a break, because it's getting a little too